Section 5 of Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman by Sarah H. Bradford. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. At one time Harriet was much troubled in spirit about her three brothers, feeling sure that some great evil was impending over their heads. She wrote a letter by the hand of a friend to a man named Jacob Jackson, who lived near there. Jacob was a free negro who could both read and write, and who was under suspicion at that time, as it was thought he had something to do with the disappearance of so many slaves. It was necessary, therefore, to be very cautious in writing to him. Jacob had an adopted son, William Henry Jackson, also free, who had come South, and so Harriet determined to sign her letter with his name, knowing that Jacob would be clever enough to understand by her peculiar phraseology what meaning she intended to convey to him. She therefore, after speaking of indifferent matters, said, "Read my letter to the old folks, and give my love to them, and tell my brothers to be always watching unto prayer, and when the good old ship of Zion comes along, to be ready to step aboard." The letter was signed William Henry Jackson. Jacob was not allowed to have his letters till the self-elected inspectors had had the reading of them and studied into their secret meaning. They therefore got together, wiped their glasses and got them on, and proceeded to a careful perusal of this mysterious document. What it meant they could not imagine. William Henry Jackson had no parents or brothers, and the letter was incomprehensible. White genius having exhausted itself, black genius was called in, and Jacob's letter was at last handed to him. Jacob saw at once what it meant, but tossed it down, saying, "Dat letter can't be meant for me nohow. I can't make head nor tail of it," and walked off, and took immediate measures to let Harriet's brothers know secretly that she was coming, and they must be ready to start at a moment's notice for the North. When Harriet arrived there, it was the day before Christmas, and she found her three brothers who had attempted to escape were advertised to be sold on Christmas Day to the highest bidder, to go down to the cotton and rice fields with the chain gang. Christmas came on Sunday, and therefore they were not to be sold till Monday. Harriet arrived on Saturday and gave them secret notice to be ready to start Saturday night, immediately after dark, the first stopping place to be their father's cabin 40 miles away. When they assembled, their brother John was missing. But when Harriet was ready, the word was "forward," and she never waited for no one. Poor John was almost ready to start when his wife was taken ill, and in an hour or two another little inheritor of the blessings of slavery had come into the world. John must go off for a "granny," and then he would not leave his wife in her present circumstances. But after the birth of the child he began to think he must start, the North and liberty, or the South and lifelong slavery. These were the alternatives, and this was his last chance. He tried again and again to steal out of the door, but a watchful eye was on him, and he was always arrested by the question, "Where you goin', John?" At length he told her he was going to try to see if he couldn't get hired out on Christmas to another man. His wife did not think he was to be sold. He went out of the door and stood by the corner of the house near her bed listening. At length he heard her sobbing and crying, and not being able to endure it, he went back. "Oh, John," said his wife, "you're going to leave me. But wherever you go, remember me and the chillun." John went out and started at full speed for his father's cabin, 40 miles away. At daybreak he overtook the others in the fodder house near the cabin of their parents. Harriet had not seen her mother there for 6 years, but they did not dare to let the old woman know of their being in her neighborhood or of their intentions, for she would have raised such an uproar in her efforts to detain them with her that the whole plantation would have been alarmed. The poor old woman had been expecting the boys all day to spend Christmas with her as usual. She had been hard at work, had killed a pig and put it to all the various uses to which sinner's flesh is doomed, and had made all the preparations her circumstances admitted of to give them a sumptuous entertainment, and there she sat watching. In the night, when Harriet and 2 of her brothers and 2 other men who had escaped with them arrived at the fodder house, they were exhausted and famished. They sent the 2 strange men up to the house to try and speak to "Old Ben," their father, but not to let their mother know of their being in the neighborhood. The men succeeded in rousing old Ben, who came out, and as soon as he heard their story, he gathered together a quantity of provisions and came down to the fodder house and slipped them inside the door, taking care not to see his children. Up among the ears of corn they lay, and one of them he had not seen for 6 years. It rained very hard all that Sunday, and there they lay all day, for they could not start till night. At about daybreak John joined them. There were wide chinks in the boards of the fodder house, and through them they could see their father's cabin, and all day long, every few minutes, they would see the old woman come out and, shading her eyes with her hand, take a long look down the road to see if her children were coming, and then they could almost hear her sigh as she turned into the house, disappointed. 2 or 3 times the old man came down and pushed food inside the door, and after nightfall he came to accompany them part of the way upon their journey. When he reached the fodder house, he tied his handkerchief tight over his eyes, and 2 of his sons, taking him by each arm, he accompanied them some miles upon their journey. They then bade him farewell and left him standing blindfold in the middle of the road. When he could no longer hear their footsteps, he took off the handkerchief and turned back. But before leaving, they had gone up to the cabin to take a silent farewell of the poor old mother. Through the little window of the cabin they saw the old woman sitting by her fire with a pipe in her mouth, her head on her hand, rocking back and forth as she did when she was in trouble, and wondering what new evil had come to her children. With streaming eyes they watched her for 10 or 15 minutes, but time was precious, and they must reach their next station before daybreak, and so they turned sadly away. When the holidays were over and the men came for the 3 brothers to sell them, they could not be found. The first place to search was of course the plantation where all their relatives and friends lived. They went to the big house and asked the doctor if he had seen anything of them. The doctor said no, they mostly came up there to see the other niggers when they came for Christmas, but they hadn't been round at all. "Have you been down to old Ben's?" the doctor asked. "Yes." "What does old Rit say?" "Old Rit says not a one of 'em came this Christmas. She was looking for 'em most all day, and most broke her heart about it." "What does old Ben say?" "Old Ben says he hasn't seen one of his children this Christmas." "Well, if old Ben says that, they haven't been round." And so the man hunters went off disappointed. One of the other brothers, William Henry, had long been attached to a girl named Catherine, who lived with another master. but her master would not let her marry him. When William Henry made up his mind to start with Harriet, he determined to bring Catherine with him. And so he went to a tailor's and bought a new suit of men's clothes and threw them over the garden fence of Catherine's master. The garden ran down to a run, and Catherine had been notified where to find the clothes. When the time had come to get ready, Catherine went to the foot of the garden and dressed herself in the suit of men's clothes. She was soon missed, and all the girls in the house were set to looking for Catherine. Presently they saw coming up through the garden, as if from the river, a well-dressed little darky, and they all stopped looking for Catherine to stare at him. He walked directly by them, round the house, and went out of the gate, without the slightest suspicion being excited as to who he was. In a fortnight from that time the whole party was safe in Canada. William Henry died in Canada, but Catherine has been seen and talked with by the writer at the house of the old people. Of the many letters, testimonials, and passes placed in the hands of the writer by Harriet, the following are selected for insertion in this book and are quite sufficient to verify her statements. A letter from General Saxton to a lady of Auburn. Atlanta, Georgia, March 21, 1868. My dear Madam, I have just received your letter informing me that Hon. William H. Seward, Secretary of State, would present a petition to Congress for a pension to Harriet Tubman for services rendered in the Union Army during the late war. I can bear witness to the value of her services in South Carolina and Florida. She was employed in the hospitals and as a spy. She made many a raid inside the enemy's lines, displaying remarkable courage, zeal, and fidelity. She was employed by General Hunter, and I think by Generals Stevens and Sherman, and is as deserving of a pension from the Government for her services as any other of its faithful servants. I am, very truly yours, Rufus Saxton, Brevet Brigadier General, U.S.A. Letter from Hon. William H. Seward, Washington, July 25, 1868. Major General Hunter, My dear Sir, Harriet Tubman, a colored woman, has been nursing our soldiers during nearly all the war. She believes she has a claim for faithful services to the command in South Carolina with which you are connected, and she thinks that you would be disposed to see her claim justly settled. I have known her long, and a nobler, higher spirit, or a truer, seldom dwells in the human form. I commend her, therefore, to your kind and best attentions. Faithfully your friend, William H. Seward. Letter from Colonel James Montgomery, St. Helena Island, South Carolina, July 6, 1863. Headquarters, Colored Brigade. Brigadier General Gilmore, Commanding Department of the South. General: I wish to commend to your attention Mrs. Harriet Tubman, a most remarkable woman and invaluable as a scout. I have been acquainted with her character and actions for several years. Walter D. Plowden is a man of tried courage and can be made highly useful. I am, General, your most obedient servant, James Montgomery, Colonel Command Brigade. Letter from Mrs. General A. Baird, Peterborough, November 24, 1864. The bearer of this, Harriet Tubman, a most excellent woman, who has rendered faithful and good services to our Union Army, not only in the hospital, but in various capacities, having been employed under Government at Hilton Head and in Florida, and I commend her to the protection of all officers in whose department she may happen to be. She has been known and esteemed for years by the family of my uncle, Hon. Gerrit Smith, as a person of great rectitude and capabilities. Mrs. General A. Baird. Letter from Hon. Gerrit Smith, Peterborough, New York, November 4, 1867. I have known Mrs. Harriet Tubman for many years. Seldom, if ever, have I met with a person more philanthropic, more self-denying, and of more bravery. Nor must I omit to say that she combines with her sublime spirit remarkable discernment and judgment. During the late war, Mrs. Tubman was eminently faithful and useful to the cause of our country. She is poor and has poor parents. Such a servant of the country should be well paid by the country. I hope that the Government will look into her case. Gerrit Smith. Testimonial from Gerrit Smith, Peterborough, November 22, 1864. The bearer, Harriet Tubman, needs not any recommendation. Nearly all the nation over she has been heard of for her wisdom, integrity, patriotism, and bravery. The cause of freedom owes her much. The country owes her much. I have known Harriet for many years, and I hold her in my high esteem. Gerrit Smith. Certificate from Henry K. Durant, Acting Assistant Surgeon, U.S.A. I certify that I have been acquainted with Harriet Tubman for nearly 2 years, and my position as medical officer in charge of contrabands in this town and in hospital has given me frequent and ample opportunities to observe her general deportment, particularly her kindness and attention to the sick and suffering of her own race. I take much pleasure in testifying to the esteem in which she is generally held. Henry K. Durant, Acting Assistant Surgeon, U.S.A., in charge, Contraband Hospital, dated at Beaufort, South Carolina, the 3rd day of May, 1864. I concur fully in the above. R. Saxton, Brigadier General Volunteers. The following are a few of the passes used by Harriet throughout the war. Many others are so defaced that it is impossible to decipher them. Headquarters, Department of the South, Hilton Head, Port Royal, South Carolina, February 19, 1863. Pass the bearer, Harriet Tubman, to Beaufort and back to this place and wherever she wishes to go, and give her free passage at all times on all government transports. Harriet was sent to me from Boston by Governor Andrew of Massachusetts, and is a valuable woman. She has permission as a servant of the government to purchase such provisions from the commissary as she may need. D. Hunter, Major General Command. General Gillmore, who succeeded General Hunter in command of the Department of the South, appends his signature to the same pass. Headquarters of the Department of the South, July 1, 1863. Continued in force. Q. A. Gillmore, Brigadier General Command. Beaufort, August 28, 1862. Will Captain Warfield please let Moses have a little bourbon whiskey for medicinal purposes? Henry K. Durant, Acting Assistant Surgeon. War Department, Washington, D.C., March 20, 1865. Pass Mrs. Harriet Tubman, colored, to Hilton Head and Charleston, South Carolina, with free transportation on a government transport. By order of the Secretary of War, Lewis H., Assistant Adjutant General, U.S.A., to Brevet Brigadier General Van Vliet, U.S. Quartermaster, New York. Not transferable. War Department, Washington, D.C., July 22, 1865. Permit Harriet Tubman to proceed to Fortress Monroe, Virginia, on a government transport. Transportation will be furnished free of cost. By order of the Secretary of War, L. H., Assistant Adjutant General. Not transferable. Appointment as nurse. Sir, I have the honor to inform you that the Medical Director, Department of Virginia, has been instructed to appoint Harriet Tubman, nurse or matron, at the Colored Hospital, Fort Monroe, Virginia. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, V. K. Barnes, Surgeon General. Hon. William H. Seward, Secretary of State, Washington, D. C. Names of Harriet's assistants, scouts, or pilots. Scouts who are residents of Beaufort and well acquainted with the mainland: Peter Barnes, Mott Blake, Sandy Selters, Solomon Gregory, Isaac Hayward, Gabriel Cohen, George Chisholm. Pilots who know the channels of the rivers in this vicinity and who acted as such for Colonel Montgomery up the Combahee River: Charles Simmons, Samuel Hayward. Appended, R. Saxton, Brigadier General. End of section 5.